Hello trumpet players and musicians in general. This is video number 3 in our Stage Fright Video Series. In this video, we're going to be talking about what I'm calling Stoic music practice. Before we talk about what is Stoic music practice and how to do it, let's take a step back to look at what kinds of problems we have in our practice time. That I actually believe that 90% of the people who think they have stage fright are actually practicing stage fright into their music. They are practicing stage fright into their performances. To figure this out, let's start with the performance itself. What is it that you're trying to avoid? If I'm wrong about this, please tell me in the comments. But most of us, what we're trying to avoid in these stage fright episodes, these performance anxiety episodes, we're trying to avoid this panic, fear, and what's the other word? Panic, fear, and anxiety that comes from the terror of being on stage, right? And this is an emotional thing. And a lot of you practice, and it's not your fault. A lot of this is the culture's fault. I'm pro-culture. You've heard me say that in other videos. I am absolutely pro-culture. We need to be part of the culture. That does not mean that everything the culture says and does is right and true. And it is our responsibility to stand up and say, this is wrong or this is not good, when the culture gets it wrong. And the culture says that the best performances happen because we were self-critical. Which is not the same thing as self-evaluation. I think self-evaluation, yeah, and maybe you can call, maybe this is just a play with words, okay? Maybe self-criticism is part of this self-evaluation. But culturally speaking, there is a heavy, for lack of a better word, spirit of negativity that hangs over us as we practice. We have to, and what does this look like? Let's get out of the wishy-washy stuff and let's get into the details of what this looks like. You tried to play it. It wasn't right. That's not good enough. It has to be better. It has to be better. You have to hold yourself to that standard, or you'll never be the best. That's the culture we come from. That's the band culture. That's the orchestra culture. That's the music culture. And that seems wholesome and good on the surface. But it's the source of a lot of practical issues. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not suggesting that we should not hold ourselves to a standard. Absolutely, we should hold ourselves to a standard. You know what the problem with this is? You might get it from the title of the video. It's not emotional. Holding yourself to a standard emotionally robs you of holding yourself to a standard musically. I'm going to say that again because I stuttered. Holding yourself to a high standard emotionally robs you from the ability to be able to hold yourself to a high standard musically. You can't have both. And it's because of a practical issue. And we're going to get into that right now. I believe this is happening to 90% of the people who experience stage fright. In fact, I'll go as far as to say, remember in the previous video we talked about if you've got mental issues that are causing this. We talked about that. Most of you don't have those mental issues. Most of you are doing this because it was taught into you by the culture. I'm not pointing fingers at the teachers because the teachers had it too. They got it taught to them. So you can't blame your teachers. This process of holding yourself to a high standard cannot be emotional because that will prevent you. Now let's look at it. You're at home practicing. You don't play it well enough for your standard. And I went through this too. At first, you stomp your foot. Maybe you grunted. Then you didn't get it right the second time or the third time. Now you're going to start clenching your teeth because you really want to be the best that you can be. And after 10 times, it's still not going well. So you pound your leg with your fist. After a while, you start throwing things. By the way, I call these musical temper tantrums. I remember one time, maybe I shouldn't be saying this, my son was practicing. And he had to go through this too, right? I taught him about this when he was like 5 years old. He was practicing, he couldn't get it right. And at one point he goes, bang, bang, he's a piano player, right? Bang, 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 right? Musical temper tantrum. It's not good enough, and so therefore, and you know what? Why do we have those musical temper tantrums? I've been thinking about that for a long time. What's the purpose? What good does that do us? And I think what it does, one of two things. Either it proves to yourself that you really, really care. Or maybe it proves to other people that you really, really, really care how well you play. And that, like I said, a lot of this stuff seems good on the surface, but it's not good because of what it's doing to your performance. It's not good because it's all emotional, and it's being channeled in the wrong direction. That the goodness of what it could have been is being channeled the wrong way. It's not being channeled through your music. So what I try to teach my students and what I try to do myself is what I am now calling, as of today, I only now thought of it, I'm calling it Stoic music practice. Basically what I'm talking about is that the process of practicing should always be a series of organized steps. You should never, when you're practicing, let's make this clear, you should never when you're practicing, have to try harder. That should never be a thing. Never. If you have to try harder, you don't know how to practice. Good practice requires a certain sequence of steps. Step A, and if you're not done with step A, you don't move on. In fact, I've told people, I think I have some videos about this. When you move on is when you decide how good you're going to be. Going from step A to step B, if you decide, okay, that's good enough, I'm moving on, that's how good you're going to be. But the flip side of that is if you say, no, that's not good enough, trying harder is not the answer. It's never the answer when it comes to structured music practice. Trying harder is what leads to stage fright. Because trying harder is an emotional thing, not a practical, rational thing. So I tell my students, when you're practicing, it's just business. I'm going to say that again. When you're practicing, it's just business. There's no room for emotion there. There is no call to throw things and stomp your feet and grunt. There's no place for that in your practice time. Practice time is just business. If you want to spill your emotions out, do it in the music, not in the practice process. So if you're practicing something, put your heart into it when you're playing. But when it comes to the actual process of learning the piece, that should never be an emotional process. This is very serious. So when you sit down to practice, you have a series of steps you need to follow. If you don't have a series of steps, learn what those steps should be. If you're just sitting down and trying to practice, I have 2 videos on my channel called The Worst Way to Practice, and that's the worst way to practice. Just sit down and try to get the music right is the worst way to practice. And I guarantee you, if you practice like that, chances are you will have stage fright scenarios. Crash and burn stage fright scenarios. Because it's all emotional now. Your music is only better because you try harder, and trying harder is just an emotional thing. So what we want to do instead is have a series of steps that have to be accomplished. Going from one step to the next, A to B, is just business. If you didn't get it right, you make a note of it, and you do what you have to do to fix it. Now let me tell you what happens if you don't do that. If you're accustomed to pounding your leg or stamping your feet or grunting or screaming or any other type of emotional outburst in your practice time, how do you expect that to not happen in the form of stage fright on stage? Isn't it the same thing? Isn't what you're experiencing on stage the exact same thing as what you're doing at home? 90% of my students, this is what's happening to them. %90. If you behave like that in your practice time, There's no way to avoid those emotional outbursts on stage. Now, it doesn't happen the same way on stage, right? It doesn't happen the same way. The way it manifests is not with you pounding your fist necessarily. Every student I've done this with, every student, like, I take that back. I just realized there was one I can remember who, at least while he was my student, this stuff didn't help him. But everybody else, who I've helped learn how to be more stoic, less emotional in their practice, everybody, except that one student. Now, I've only been teaching this way for about 10 years, talking specifically about this. And I think because of my son, right? I think seeing my son go through this and having, after me, had gone through that when I was younger, I think that's what opened my eyes to all of this. When the student learns how to be stoic, because that, when I say, back then I used to call it just that practice is just business. Now I'm going to call it from this day forward, stoic musical practice. And what does it mean to be stoic? It means you're not letting your emotions control you. If you can start to have a month, 2 months worth of stoic practice where you do not allow yourself to express yourself emotionally in the form of musical temper tantrums, if you can make yourself stop that, your performance anxiety on stage will improve tremendously, dramatically. Some of you might have other issues that we need to dig deeper into, but 90% of you, this is what's wrong. Okay? I hope I've made this clear. If you can practice without these outbursts that I think on the surface seem like you're telling everybody how much you care about this, how important this music is to you. If you can trash all of that, get rid of all that out of your life and get a musical goal, a musical objective, and then work in a very stoic way, a very rational way, a very unemotional way, I think you will see tremendous improvement in your stage fright symptoms on stage. You know, they say that you are what you eat. You cannot be on stage what you are not in your practice time. If you have a lack of emotional control on your practice, you will not have emotional control on stage. It's just not possible. You allow yourself to beat yourself up like that at home, you will continue to beat yourself up like that on stage. And that's not a virtue. That kind of self-deprecation is not a virtue. That kind of anger is not a virtue. It doesn't make you any better than anybody else. It makes you actually a much worse player. Okay, all right, that's number 3 in the bag, right? All right, I'm glad you're enjoying these videos. We have 2 more of these stage fright videos coming out. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask below, or join us on the kind of weekly Trumpet Q and A. We do those on Fridays. Other than that, God bless you, and we'll see you on the next video. Thank you.